To our March 2018 survey, again, we are Realtors Land Institute. We're affiliated with the National Association of Realtors, or organized of realtors specializing in farm and land real estate sales, appraisals, management, and development. The participants in the survey are asked to give their estimate of the current market as of March 1st for bare unimproved land as a sale price on a cash basis. So no contract sales. We're just going to get right to it. The survey, we actually indicate that we have seen a 2.9% increase in our agricultural farmland sales on an average statewide from September through March. Here is how it is positioned through our crop reporting districts. We have several different regions that have actually seen some significant increases that definitely stand out above the other regions. So we're seeing the east central part of Iowa. We've had some really good sales, and we've actually seen the values there increase 4.3%. We've also seen a lot more activity in north central Iowa, where we have seen an increase at 4.0%. Northeast also has some decent activity at 3.7%. Some of the regions that, I guess southwest Iowa is one region that I kind of saw at 3.3, and I was not aware of that activity that was happening down there. So, as I'm reporting, I look at it, and even some things, make me go, well, I didn't realize that it was that strong or moving in that area, part of the state. So I'm going to open up and kind of ask different questions throughout this presentation just to get feedback from you all. Do you see a stronger increase for the agents that are in southwest Iowa? Have you seen the increased prices like this survey indicates? Yes, go ahead.
I think there's been a fair amount of average to above average land for sale, and so that's, I think, made some of that increase possible.
So higher volume of land transactions as well as higher quality transactions?
I don't know if the volume's that much greater, but I think the quality may be a little higher.
So a few higher quality transactions in the region.
Some of the rec land is finding some strength.
We'll get to the recreation part because that's another section that I want to open it up and ask about. So I'm glad that what is being reported and what everyone is seeing is reflective of what's happening in the marketplace. I look at numbers, I analyze them, put them up on the screen, and make sure that you guys indicate whether you see discrepancies with what's happening. So I appreciate the comments. Thank you, Craig. Here in central Iowa, we're at 2.9%, so we are right at what the state average is, what they saw for an increase the last 6 months. Combining our survey from September to our current survey this month, you can indicate and see what has happened over the last 12-month period for each of the crop reporting districts. East central Iowa, I will point out again, only because it is almost at 8% increase since March of 2017. Again, we see continued strength in northeast Iowa, and again, the southwest corner of Iowa, and a lot of those could be related to those higher quality transactions that have been taking place.
Kyle, do you keep the number of responses from each region?
I do keep the responses for each region, and those responses have not varied very much. I will say that we do have less responses in our southern tier portion of the state from those regions, but we are still seeing pretty average responses. I mean, we're not getting a fluctuation in them. We're staying pretty constant with the individuals that are reporting from each of the districts. This is what is happening. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, Robert.
I know that it's not in your formula because I used to chair this committee myself, but this is an awkward question. We know we peaked in 13. We know we fell. Today, where are we from where we were in the peak of 13? Have you followed that?
I have, and you will see that shortly. Give me 5 minutes and we'll be there. So this is what the yearly response has been. From March 17 to March of 18, we saw an increase right at 4.9 or 5% increase in value for the state average. This is pasture values, and I'll point out a few. The one spot here, we collect this information as supplemental so everyone can kind of see what's happening in the recreational market and the pasture market. The one region that I question here is the north central part of the state. As there's not a lot of pasture up there, and a lot of the responses that I have received in the past surveys was not much moving, steady, steady values, slight decreases here and there. But I was wondering, was there a sale of pasture land in north central Iowa that indicated a little bit stronger than what was anticipated market? Because to move 5.5%, I don't know if there was a few sales that everyone just kind of said, you know what, now we have some sales data to go off of, and the values are slightly higher. The other situation that I wanted to open up was for pasture acres. They are obviously one of the lower ones at just at $2,300 per crop acre. And I don't know if it's just a change in the values, but I want to open that up for questions. Does anyone from north central Iowa care to comment regarding that? I will state that there has been more desire for some pasture acres, and I think there's some demand there, and maybe that's just a demand-driven one where they're getting more individuals inquiring about pasture at a certain price. But any additional comments, or we'll take the survey as it is? That would be the only caveat that we have for at least the pasture acres, is that increase of 5.4. But as you can see, there's other regions that have also seen some strength in the market. Here's the non-tillable and the timber acres. The two regions here to point out are, again, north central Iowa and southeast Iowa. Southeast Iowa came in at 8% increase, 9.6% increase in north central. Again, I think this has to do with some of the lack of recreation up there, as well as what their prices are compared to the rest of the state. Sitting right at below $1,900 an acre up there, compared to $3,000 in south central. Obviously, they don't have the size of deer in north central Iowa as they do in south central, but there is still a desire for recreational land. And as a whole, you can see that there's still continued strength in the recreational market. Visiting with individuals here this morning and talking about quality of or demand for recreation, they said that there's a significant amount of demand in the southern part of the state, primarily in the southeast and south central region. We saw a little bit of slippage in our values regarding northwest Iowa as well as southwest Iowa. Here's what some of the other surveys indicated that have come out here in the recent past. Iowa State Survey indicated that in 2017 they saw values rise at 2% for their year. The Federal Reserve indicated that their year was 3% increase for the state of Iowa. And in 2017, which was actually January 16 through December 31st of 16 for Illinois, the American Society there and RLI chapters, as well as Illinois University, indicated that their regions were down 5 to 12% depending on the quality of their land. Their survey is actually going to be released tomorrow for the 2017 year. Robert, here's where we were. This is on a state values. This is the average. What comes up with these numbers is I basically took high, medium, and low quality prices, divided them by 3. It's simple math. It's not anything that I put in formulas or anything else, but this is just a very rough estimate of what the average tillable cropland prices are. To Robert's point, we saw an increase here in March of 2013 for the survey at just short of $8,700 an acre. We are now sitting at about $6,950 And a year ago was where we were at the bottom of 65.45. You can see where we were at 10 years ago, at just short of $4,300 an acre. And one of the talking points is that in the last 3 years, I think we've seen a disconnect between land values and the actual production that can be generated, or income generated off of our crop ground. In the past, we could easily tie agricultural prices of land to the commodity prices in some type of correlation. In the last 3 years, we actually saw that divide split just a little bit. Incomes continued to go down, and we found some stability in the land market. I would like to, ask the question: do you see that it is primarily maybe a new base that investors, farmers felt like land values got, for a lack of a better term, cheaper, and they were interested in buying and setting a new base to land values? Or do you believe that it was just market conditions at the time, and we're kind of seeing where we're going, trying to take a breath and find the direction of the market? Anyone wish to comment on what their thoughts are regarding that division between income that can be generated and the land values? Yes, Kirk.
The last 3-4 years, that divergence between land values and commodity prices coming down is greater than it has been at any time in the last 34 years. We've had, to your point, a fairly consistent relationship. So the challenge for all the crop years is trying to understand how will that divergence come together. Will it be a little bit of income increasing? Will it be a little bit of land values coming down? Or the anomaly we have out there right now is very disturbing.
I agree. And it is disturbing to see that disconnect. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we are going to see incomes come up, land values come down to get that connection again, or whether we've found a new playing field or something else that we have to try to understand what is the dynamics of what is driving the land values, or to keep them at the stable level. Whether the investor buyers believe that it gets down, long-term investments, they start looking more long-term, and they feel like it gets down to a point where they can get a rate of return, they get in, and they're creating a new floor, or farmers are creating a new floor because they want to obtain that piece that's next to them that fits them for the next, for their lifetime, and to pass it on. I'm not sure if that's what's happening or not. I just opened it up. I wanted to get input because it's definitely there, and there's definitely a disconnect. So I wanted to see. Anyone else wish to comment on it? I think as of right now, I would say this is kind of a new norm to see this type of disconnect. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work out well for the end producer. But we'll take a look and see where we go from here. But it's definitely getting to be a very volatile market and situation. Here's some of the positive factors that were responded to in our questionnaire. Cheap interest rates, they're still historically low, even though they have been continued to move higher. When we start looking at the history of what the interest rates are, we are continuing to see that you can lock in really good interest rates for the long term. There's also a lot of low supply out there. There's not, we've seen areas like East Central Iowa, North Central Iowa, Northeast Iowa that have had some increased volume. But as a state whole, we'll get to it here shortly, the state whole felt like we were pretty steady in our volume of land transactions. So the other thing is we kind of just talked about income. Higher yields than expected were obtained last year. And I think with that higher yields, it added a little bit of extra income that was not anticipated. In August of last year, if anyone would have said that we were going to be harvesting 200 bushel corn around the state, I think a lot of people might have laughed and said, I hope so. And instead we had situations where we were harvesting well above 200 bushel corn around the state. Those higher yields help offset some of the lower commodity prices. Here recently, we have seen some increase in our commodity prices. from our last survey, starting in December to here currently. I say currently as of a couple weeks ago. I haven't seen them since, but we saw some opportunities to sell some grain at higher than anticipated prices coming out of harvest last fall. Some of the other responses, positive factors, was that there was money moving from the stock market to land. People wanted to get out of the stock market and get into a solid asset. I think a lot of that has to do with what is happening with our government, the uncertainties, as well as the multiple individuals that talk about a stock market correction coming. Some of the negative factors, also interest rates, those are moving higher. The low and continued long-term lower commodity prices, even though there have been opportunities within it, they still continue to be fairly low. Also the tight operating capital. Farmers are working on a tighter budget, and we heard earlier today those struggles that they have in trying to justify and pay for a new purchase. There's also a lot of uncertainty with the Farm Bill, what's going to happen there, as well as our trade uncertainty. If the tariffs, if we do get into a trade war, what type of impact will that have on our land values if that happens, and if it's a long-term situation? I think it could have a lot of devastating effects on our current land market.
Kyle, is the farm credit guy still here that gave this speech?
I don't believe so. I think Justin had to
Curious
leave.
to see how much of a debt to asset increase they had in their lenders in the last year. When you look at those prices, it might be pretty obvious if you're losing money growing your crop, where you're getting the money to keep operating. So, because land values are the only thing that's really stayed higher, so I would be curious to see what the debt to asset ratio was recently.
I know some of the surveys that or presentations I've given, I did have a survey from the USDA, can't think of the actual report, but they indicated that we were somewhere right around, I wanted to say, Randy, do you recall? Is it right? It was really significantly a lot lower than I thought it was. Even though we saw in the last few years the debt to asset increase, we actually saw a decrease last year in it on a national level. So I don't know how that would pertain to Iowa itself regarding the debt to asset ratio. That could be higher here and lower in other parts of the country, but as a nation, it seems that we've seen a little bit of a spike, and now just last year saw a slight decrease in that debt to asset. Yes, Robert?
Perhaps on the upside of values, there's a little bit of a hidden factor here, and that is in terms of machinery replacement. During those really high income years, the guys machined up all they could, favorable tax data and all that. So now they've got enough machinery that they can keep some of the big beans in the bag, and they might be willing to spend it on land because they don't need
the machinery. They don't need it. Yep.
And so it's available.
Good point. So who's buying? This slide actually somewhat shocked me, because I think our last survey in September indicated that farmers were buying 74% of the farms that were coming on the market, and investors were roughly somewhere in the 20% range. As of this survey, the typical response, and we took all 150 responses or questionnaires that we received back, and the average response was 83% were actual farmer buyers for the land that was sold in the last 6 months. 13% were investors, which is slightly down from what we had indicated before. And is this an accurate portrayal of the market on who's buying? Has the farmers increased their purchases and investors have slowed down, or is it more 1031 exchanges from farmers that happen to be assisting in the buying? Again, I'll open it up, because I'm learning as well. We have always said 75 to 80% of the farms are being purchased by an active farmer in the area primarily, and this is just a slightly higher number, and didn't know anyone had additional comments regarding it. I think it's pretty close then. Iowa State indicated in November that they saw 72% of the buyers were farmers and 22% were investors. And of the sales that happened, what percentage of them were influenced by a 1031 exchange? I use the word influence because some of the auctions, the contending bidder may have 1031 money that they need to replace or find replacement property, and it may be between the actual buyer and the 1031 individual for the last couple $100 an acre. So you would influence that sale because that 1031 buyer pushed and was one of the final ones to push that value higher to do it. So of that, the sales that were influenced by a 1031, the typical or average response was right at 15%. Was either a 1031 buyer or it was influenced by a 1031 buyer.
How does that compare to the last 6 months or a year ago?
In the last 6 months to a year, that's pretty close to where we typically sit, is at about that 15% range. I think we saw a little bit of an increase in our last survey, maybe up near 20, but it seems to be in that mid to upper teens on the majority of our responses. Who is selling? The estates and trust. That was a extremely high response. Really, that we only received a handful of individuals that said current operators were selling, and a lot of that was due to generating capital for their operation. So we are seeing some distressed sales, but not as many as you would think. Still, the majority of the sellers are estates and trusts. So return on investment for the buyers. On cropland, the typical or average response was they are looking for a 3.2% return on their investment. I kind of thought we would probably be somewhere between 2.5% and 3%. I thought 3% seems to be a little bit higher or a little bit more difficult to obtain. But for a state anyway, and from all the participants, a 3.2% rate of return for cropland, and for CRP land, we were sitting at about 4.6% of the annual return for the rate of return that you have there. Recreational land, still being purchased by a lot of the outdoorsmen, avid hunters, as well as out of the area investors. There's a lot of individuals that are looking for their little piece of heaven to go out to have some type of retreat, a little place in the woods to get away from it all, as well as the activity for that market has been steady, and in some cases in southern Iowa, pretty strong, and seeing a lot of activity there in southern Iowa, but steady from a state standpoint. Some of the other buyers for that are county conservation boards. They continue to look to improve state parks and buy for habitat purposes. Volumes compared to last year, again, this was some of the responses, steady, same, slightly less. So even though there's been some hot areas from a state standpoint, we were pretty steady for the volume of the market. Listings versus auctions. Auctions are still the primary method for high quality sales. It still brings the activity on a specific day, makes someone react that day, and makes a decision. 60% of the properties are auctioned, 40% are listed. However, we're seeing just a little bit of a movement towards more private listings from the auctions, and that could be dependent, obviously, on the quality of land that's coming on the market. Farmland market for the next 1 to 3 years. As you can imagine, it's pretty mixed. We'll have anywhere from steady to higher to flat to steady or slightly less. So we're not sure exactly where the market's going to go as of this point, but we know that it's going to be very dependent on the production that we were able to generate and the crop prices that we're able to receive for our crops. but we're also in a very volatile market. We'll see sales that are really high one day and something that sells a little bit light the next day in a very similar location and area. This is the trend line, and I want to point this out again because I think this is a very interesting slide. What we took was, and this is I have to give credit to the Hertz Appraisal Services Department for doing this, and this is off of our values in our survey that we've done. But we made a trend line yield in the first part of the 2000s, from 2000 all the way through 2010 here. We did a trend line based on those values of agricultural farmland and just continued it on. Then we wanted to see how far off a trend line we went in the high of the market. So from March of 2011 on, we started seeing the increase happen. Here is our March survey, where we hit the high of the market, and then we started to continue down for the last couple of years. What I wanted to show is our last 3 reporting, we have been basically back on our trend line yield, our trend line values from what we saw in the early portion of the 2000s. If we continue to stay here, we may be able to see a 2 to 3% increase if we stay on trend line for our surveys moving forward. Now, obviously, you can make a trend line wherever you thought you would want to try and come here somewhere or down, depending on where you position it. But it at least shows us that prior to our high commodity prices, we are back to the values or increases that we saw from a trend line standpoint as we saw in the early 2000s. Conclusion of the survey, again, values are stable to increasing, but there's still been a lot of volatility within the sales volume and sales pricing. Negatives for the land market continue to be the current commodity prices, as well as the tight margins that operators are receiving. The uncertainty of government with the Farm Bill and trade activity, whether that's going to affect us moving forward. Also, the potential for long-term interest rates increasing is also a negative for the market right now, as it could create some inflation issues. Some positives though, still farmers are the primary buyers right now. A lot of them still have some cash on hand. I am interested to see what the survey indicates this spring from Iowa State University. They come out every 4 years with a survey that talks about how much of the agricultural farmland in Iowa is debt-free. So I'm interested to see what that survey indicates this year, as a lot of people have used equity in their farms that they currently own completely debt-free to finance their current purchases and lock in those long-term interest rates. There's still very limited amount of land on the market, and the activity has been very strong, and the demand has been very strong, and the slight increase in commodity prices hopefully gives us a little bit of hope that the prices will correct and move slightly higher. Again, farmers are the primary buyers. Recreational buyers are very active, especially in the high timber and bigger deer counties. But the future is still completely uncertain. But as of right now, we're currently steady to slightly increasing. Depending on commodity prices and the amount of volume of land on the market. If we have a lot of land come on the market, we could see some saturation in certain areas that could have an effect on values. I want to open it up for questions, and I know we've got some regional VPs with RLI here that can help and assist in answering questions if I'm unable to. So I'll open it up for any questions that anyone has regarding the survey. Yes?
Maybe not asked on your survey, but in your experience, any increase in no sales at these auctions, you know?
There's still no sales that take place, but those are still a very small percentage of the sales that go to auction result in that. A lot of the times it has a lot of to do with either expectations of the sellers, whether it's always hard to educate individuals to understand where their market or their property fits in into the market. Our first presenter today, or second, indicated and talked about everyone believes their farm is the best quality. And so it's hard to curb some of those expectations. But it could also just be the location that the property is in as well. It could be a decent farm in a weak area that an auction is just not, it just doesn't take place, or it doesn't happen that day and get the competition you need to result in a sale. But still no sales. I don't see the volume of those increasing at this time. Yes, Scott?
I tend to think that your 1031 influence is substantially greater in the last 6 months or a year than in the past. You got money coming out of Des Moines now, Omaha, and it just seems like more of the sales are being influenced than 15%. I would have thought 30, 40% of the sales have some 1031 influence.
Scott's comments are basically that he thought there was more 1031, and from my personal experience, I would agree that I think there's a lot of 1031 buyers out there that are using the exchange. I would have rated my own up more like 25% of the transactions being affected. But we have a wide range of responses, but this is what the average was for this particular time frame. And it could be because we actually saw a slight increase in our values that, maybe the investors are holding off, but I agree. I still think that there's a little bit more of the buyers out there that have 1031 money. Yes, Dick?
Most of the assessors in my neighborhood are going to the CSR too. And it's pretty firm that they're not gonna ever go back to CSR. And now we start valuing land by the CSR. So was that by the CSR 1 or the CSR 2? When are we gonna drop the CSR and forget it and just go to CSR 2 so everybody's on the same page?
I would agree. It's one where, there for a couple of years, everyone was using both the CSR ratings and CSR2 ratings. For full disclosure, I can say that we've gone to CSR2 ratings on our information and are not analyzing sales by CSR rating anymore. All of ours is by CSR2.
Yeah, I would
Scott?
agree with that. We're all CSR2.
You're all CSR2. I think that most of the assessor sites are all converted to CSR2 ratings now. There might be a few counties that aren't. I don't know for sure, but I believe the majority are now switched to CSR2 ratings. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Just kind of off the wall, but are you seeing a lesser acres per transaction where some of these estates are selling and they end up parceling so they can maximize?
So the question was, do we see less acres per transaction? So let's just say we have a 240 acre parcel. Are we seeing more 80 acre tracts selling, or whether we're seeing a 160 or a 240? I think it's, first off, to answer the question, I don't have the data to show whether the sales are getting less acres per transaction. I would say that from a standpoint of a real estate agent and auctioneer, I would look at the property itself and divide it the way that I see is the best fit for the client. It's always nice to be able to offer a smaller parcel if it's an easy split, to allow someone that's looking for an 80 to still participate in the auction or have an opportunity of buying a tract. But if it doesn't make sense for the sellers or their desire, they may say, you know what, I don't want to have anything at the end. I don't want one piece that maybe doesn't sell it all as 240. So we see a little bit of both. It really is very dependent upon our clients' wishes, as well as what we believe is the proper way to split the farm and offer it to allow as many people to participate, as that's our ultimate goal, is have more people participate in the auction. Any other comments regarding that? Does anyone have data? Because I do not. Are we seeing more or fewer acres per transaction? Yes, sir.
Our database showed that it was fewer acres.
It is fewer acres?
During 2016 to 2017.
Okay.
The average size of the transaction was a little smaller.
Thank you, Dennis.
That's just northwest Iowa.
Yep. Thank you. So we might see a little bit fewer acres per transaction. Anyone else? Yes, Gene?
Any impact from the, I know this would be pretty recent, but from tax changes, either on the federal or potential at the state level?
Like you indicated, it's still a little bit early to see if we have any influence in the land market based on the tax changes. I think we were able to save the 1031 exchanges, which I think we should all be very thankful for, because I think if that went away, there would be a lot more, probably a sour attitude in the market being able to not use that tool. So don't know if there's any true effect at this time. Anyone else? With that, Terry, I'll turn it over to you. I think we're right on schedule.
Right.